we're doing a 3-part series where we are breaking down our 41-page California based lease section by section, discussing mostly all of the clauses and why they are important. Leases are, for the most part, the most important document landlords are going to handle with their rental property. And guess what? It makes no difference if you use a property manager or not. You better be looking at the leases they provide as well. It is very common for property managers to use one lease for all of their clients, and we know because we are property managers. And this is why it's important that you take the time to familiarize yourself with the contents of the lease and make sure it works in conjunction with your policies. Welcome to your Landlord Resource Podcast. Many moons ago, when I started as a landlord, I was as green as it gets. I may have had my real estate license, but I lacked confidence and the hands-on experience needed when it came to dealing with tenants, leases, maintenance, and bookkeeping. After many failed attempts, fast forward to today, Kevin and I have doubled our doors and created an organized, professionally operated rental property business. Want to go from overwhelmed to confident? If you're an ambitious landlord or maybe one in the making, join us as we provide strategies and teach actionable steps to help you reach your goals and the lifestyle you desire, all while building a streamlined and profitable rental property business. This is your Landlord Resource Podcast. Hi there, landlords. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stacy, and I'm here with my partner in life and business, Kevin.
Well, let me tell you something. If you had told me 15 years ago, I'd be here right now recording a podcast to help DIY landlords, I would have laughed and said, no way.
Well, if it was 15 years ago, you likely would be asking what the hell is a podcast?
Yeah, well, you have a point. But let's just say I'm a late bloomer. I mean, I married for the first time at age 58, and I certainly did not give my retirement plans any consideration until just a few years back.
Well, you married when you found love, so who cares how old you are when that happens? And as for retirement, I think you're not so out of the norm on that. Retirement planning for most is probably pretty scary to think about. It means one, financially, you have to evaluate where you're at and where you want to be in however many years. And two, I think most people are not prepared for the educational and financial undertaking that retirement savings brings. I mean, think about it. First, you need to determine how much money you have to take from your budget. And then you have to figure out what's the best way to invest those funds so it grows to the amount you determine is needed for retirement age.
Yeah, that's all true. It's also why we're always writing the boys to start saving for retirement, even if it's only 50 or $100 a month. But for me, I think I just had my head in the sand. It was easier to ignore that commitment than to face the fear of what it would take to reach those goals. Even thinking about my finances was enough to make me avoid it. I, like many others, had some debt,
Yeah, and I was right there with you on that,
right? And I was also living a little above my means.
as was I. But when we started dating and we eventually got married, let's just say we had a come to Jesus moment that changed all that. And we faced the fear and laid it all out on the line. We made some changes in our lifestyle, like eating out less, a lot less, and really thinking about making sure that what we purchased was what we needed.
I think it helped that you have a dream big, can do attitude. We kept talking about our dreams, our goals, our aspirations, but I wasn't sure on how to get there or even where to start. The idea of sitting down and looking at all those numbers was actually frightening. It's hard to dream big when you know you have such a hurdle to jump, even get to the point where you can begin to make those dreams a reality. But we got honest with ourselves and then started to look forward. I was on board with all of it, but I seriously didn't think we would get to this place in such a short amount of time.
I think what helped us is that we stuck with what we know, and that's real estate and property management. We do have very diverse investments, but we do our best with the rental properties, which is one reason why we are here talking about our experience.
Very good point. Okay, let's get to the subject of today's podcast, and that is leases and addendums and what rental property owners should make sure, at a minimum, are included in this legally binding contract before you place a new tenant.
Yeah, this is an important subject, you guys. And we hate to do this to you again, but we felt it was best to split this episode up. This time, we're doing a three-part series where we are breaking down our 41-page California based lease section by section, discussing mostly all of the clauses and why they are important. This series is like a masterclass on what needs to be included in your lease because leases are, for the most part, the most important document landlords are going to handle with their rental property. And guess what? It makes no difference if you use a property manager or not. You better be looking at the leases they provide as well. It is very common for property managers to use one lease for all of their clients, and we know because we are property managers. And this is why it's important that you take the time to familiarize yourself with the contents of the lease and make sure it works in conjunction with your policies. For those DIY landlords who depend on pre-formatted leases that they find online or from a friend, those are a great place to start. But it's super important to go over your lease from time to time and make sure it includes as much information as possible to cover you. New laws and ordinances are put into place each year, so your lease needs to be reviewed to make sure it's up to date. We are located in California and use a very comprehensive lease that was created by the California Apartment Association. They have lots of lawyers who look over this document to ensure that it covers as much detail as possible. As members of this association, we get access to California approved leases and addendums, which are automatically updated when landlord tenant laws change. This is an important point for us because there are several cities and counties within California that have different landlord tenant laws and ordinances. So, by using the leases and addendums put out by this California based association, we have access to all the different updated forms needed depending on where the rental property is located. Now, remember, we are property managers, so from time to time, we represent other rental property owners than ourselves, so many of you may not need access to such a variety of forms.
Okay, let me jump in here real quick and let you know that many of you will not need a 41-page lease. California is a very tenant friendly state and tends to be pretty litigious also. So we feel it's important to use those legal forms we get from the California Apartment Association. Now, for our other properties, we feel that the forms we get from Easy Landlord Forms does a very good job at covering all the areas we feel are important. For those of you who are not familiar with them, Easy Landlord Forms is owned and operated by other rental property investors just like all the rest of us. They sell most every form a landlord may need, from state-specific leases, addendums, notices, and lease term change forms. They offer over 200 forms for free when you sign up for an account. But if you use the link and the code STACY15, they are offering 15% off any new form purchase. Here's why that's important. They have a monthly membership where you pay $12 a month and download any form you may need at any time. You can prepay the annual amount of $75 and get a discount off the monthly rate. I think it drops it down from, $12 to $6.25 when you do that.
Right.
Now, for those of you who want to secure forms and not get nickel and dimed each month, they now offer a lifetime membership of $399. But they are allowing our listeners to get any new purchase that includes the annual or the lifetime fees at 15% off. We'll add a link in the show notes as well as our code STACY15. That's Stacy with an IE and the number 15.
Yeah, those guys are great over there. And if you think about it, a lawyer is going to cost close to that annual rate amount just for 1 hour of time. So the lifetime option is actually a pretty killer deal. All right, let's get to the leases. So I'm going to state the obvious here, but all leases should note the parties in the lease. This would be the tenants over the age of 18, but also should somewhere list who the occupants are with their birth dates. And here's why that last part's important. If your tenants, let's say they are a husband and wife, and they are the primary parties responsible for the lease, and they have a couple of teenage children, knowing the birth dates of those children is crucial so that when they turn 18, you can add them onto the lease as a responsible party. Now, does this mean that they're responsible for paying the rent? No, it does not. What it means is that they can individually be evicted from the unit for violating the lease, be it smoking on the property, having parties, or being loud, doing or creating or selling drugs. You name it, they can be singled out. If you do not add the child occupant over the age of 18 onto the lease, that means you have to go after the parents, who might be great tenants and you hate to lose. It also means that if those parents aren't so great and they don't pay their rent on time, you can legally notify those child occupants who are over the age of 18 and added onto your lease that the rent is late. It's just an added way to keep everyone in check.
I also believe if those children are added to the lease, they can take advantage of having that on time rent paid added to their credit score. Is that right?
Possibly. But that's a very good point, too. What Kevin's talking about is we have an episode coming up about helping your tenants increase their credit score by reporting rent payments. We'll look into that and make sure that that's included if so.
All right. So, included with those parties responsible for the lease and the occupants, you should also name yourself or your company name on the lease. When signing the lease as an LLC, you are signing your name as an authorized member of the LLC. You would also need to notate anyone who has property management rights, such as a spouse or a property manager, or anyone other than yourself who has the authority to enforce the contents of the lease. Okay, for instance, for us, Stacy is the designated manager of her single member LLC, and she names me as an authorized agent for management on the lease. For our property in Idaho, the HOA mandates that we have a property manager. So both our names are on the lease for that property, and the management company is named as the responsible party for the management of the complex. Okay, moving on to the terms of the lease or rental agreement. Now, technically, a lease is for 1 year or more. Anything less than a year is a rental agreement. The terms are where you will put the important dates, like the first day in and the last day the lease is valid, before it rolls into a month-to-month rental agreement. It is also where you list the rental rate and any prorated amounts if they move in mid-month, as well as any discounts you might offer.
Let me jump in here real quick with a tip. If you're placing a tenant in fall or winter months, so let's say October through January, consider offering them a few more months on their lease to get that lease to end in spring. It is a known fact that fewer people move in the fall and winter months, and quite frankly, it's a pain to flip a unit and do showings in the middle of winter. The weather can be tough, the curb appeal is awful, and the pool of applicants is much smaller, making finding a qualified one much harder and more competitive than in spring and summer months. So see if you can extend that lease end date an extra few months to save yourself the hassle of turning a unit during less than optimal months. And we do this with the same rental rate with no increase, and that's to entice them to agree to longer terms.
We actually just did this in Idaho, and it worked perfectly. Their lease now ends in March, which is perfect for us.
While we're talking lease end dates, no matter what day the tenant moves into a unit, always have the lease end on the last day of the month. It's just easier to keep track of if you know that all your leases end on the last day than to have them all over the place on the calendar.
Man, you are just full of tips today.
No, I'm full of something. Well, I truly believe that people learn best by hearing stories of how other landlords have handled situations, and that's why we had to split this into 3 episodes. so we can include stories and tips to support why these items are so important to include in your lease.
Well, we do have over 20 years of stories and experiences to share.
That we do.
Okay, let's keep moving on here. So if you accept checks for payment, list who rent is paid to and who it is to be delivered to and at what address. Include the phone number to that address in case someone is dropping off the rent in person and needs to let you know. We use a P.O. box and not our home. Your home is the last place you want a tenant to come to unless you know them personally.
Nope. No, thank you. You should note accepted methods of payment or the link where they need to set up an account to pay their rent online. If you have office hours to accept that rent in person, this is where you note those along with the address to drop that rent off to. So we use a P.O. box, and if we have to meet a tenant in person, we'll meet them at a Starbucks or something like that. Often, this is also where you will find the amount of the security deposit with when it is required to pay that amount. It should be noted that in many states, security deposits cannot be used to pay a month's rent unless a tenant has abandoned the property and the rent has not been paid. It should also state that it is intended to be used for repairs and damages beyond standard wear and tear, cleaning to return the unit to the same level of cleanliness that it was received in, and it could be used to remedy any defaults to restore, replace, or return personal property removed by the tenant at move out. Either under terms or another heading, you need to include what your grace period and late fees are. For us, our rents are due on the 1st and we allow a 3-day grace period. But beginning on the 4th of the month, we charge a $10 per day late fee. And yes, we have made a killing on late fees in the past using this method. Here's the deal. We used to charge a flat fee of, say, I think it was $25. For tenants who need extra time, they're happy to pay that $25 fee and then pay you in a week or maybe two later. Now, you're probably thinking you'd already be serving them a pay or quit notice by that time. And that's fine. But if good tenants just need a little time, are you really going to boot them out when you could just charge them more and make that extra time worth your while? Those late fees are straight profit, and don't freak out about them being late until they reach about the 2-week point. You should always have cash for a month's worth of expenses available anyway, so you're not sweating it out and waiting for that rent to roll in.
If you have a section for fees, this is also where you would put any additional fees you charge the tenant for. Like if you charge an administrative fee, a RUBS utility billing fee, NSF fees, or fees charged for items like changing air filters or landscaping, should the tenant opt out and not be responsible for those tasks. Your lease should address who is responsible for the following items: landscaping, and we'll cover more on this in the next 2 episodes. Also, utilities, what you cover, what they cover. And this is also where you might include information about using RUBS. RUBS stands for Ratio Utility Billing Systems, which is used when you own a multifamily property and you're opting to share the utility costs you would usually absorb yourself. Examples are water bills, trash bills, maybe pest control bills, stuff like that. Basically expenses that apply to the whole building that the tenants benefit from. One thing to note is that many states require this notice be given prior to signing a lease or renewal. So if you're considering using this as an option to recapture water and trash fees from your tenants, have a line in the lease saying that at any time you can execute this option to cover yourself.
Yeah, we just learned this one. It wasn't in our lease, but we're starting the process to use RUBS in our sixplex and recapture some of that $800 in monthly fees that we pay for water, sewer, and trash. And don't worry, I was on the phone last week with one company who specializes in smaller multifamily buildings, and we are working on a podcast all about RUBS in early 2024. We want to go through the experience first so we can report back on how well it worked for us, or didn't, I guess. Okay, in your lease, you must make clear your policy on subletting. And this is important because if you don't want your tenants to Airbnb or VRBO the unit or their property and financially benefit from it, you must state that you do not allow the tenant to sublease to another party. Make sure it's stated that the only people who are legally allowed to stay are those noted as occupants on the lease, which leads me to my next section, and that is about your guest policy. Kev, why don't you talk about this one?
Okie dokie. It is important to note a guest policy so your tenants cannot say they didn't know their sister and her 3 kids couldn't stay for 3 weeks. It can reach a point where they never leave, and then you're left with either adding them onto the lease or trying to evict all of them. Our guest policy states someone can stay for 7 consecutive days and not more than 28 days in a year. Now, we do know that our single tenants who have significant others do not follow this. However, having this rule, so to speak, allows us to enforce the guest policy if we feel it's being taken advantage of, like the scenario of the sister and her 3 kids staying for weeks on end.
And we have had to do this in the past. So, a little sideline here. We had a tenant in one of our 2-bedroom units, and he was single and he really didn't use the second bedroom much. When we went in for one of our inspections, we noticed that the spare closet was loaded with women's clothes and the room had more furniture in it than before. Now, we wanted to be careful here because you never know what kind of life your tenant is living. Maybe he liked wearing women's clothing.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. So we sent out our inspection email where we give the findings of the inspection, like we changed the air filter and we tested the smoke detector and we fixed a leaky faucet. And oh, by the way, can you explain the women's clothes that are in the spare bedroom? And he came back and said, yeah, I've been meaning to contact you. I have an old college friend who needed a place to stay, and she likes it here so much. Can you let me know what we need to do to get her added to the lease? And I think she only stayed 6 to 8 months, but nonetheless, this is why it's important to have a guest policy stated in your lease.
Okay, moving on to renter's insurance. This section should state whether renter's insurance is required or optional. If you require it, you must indicate the minimum amount of personal liability coverage. Stacy and I require $100,000 for our apartments and $250,000 for our single-family home rentals. It should also state that the rental property address and the unit need to be listed, as well as the landlord and/or property manager must be listed as a certificate holder, additionally insured, or interested party. This is so you'll be notified should the policy be canceled and their renter's insurance lapses. The last thing about renter's insurance is to note when their policy must be put in force. Some say within 30 days of move-in, some require before move-in. For us, it must be enforced within 2 weeks after the tenants move in.
Jumping in here again, I got another tip for you. Set a reminder on your phone for that 2-week date. I cannot tell you how many times our tenants have forgotten, or they actually did follow through, but they didn't add us to the policy as an interested party, so we never received our confirmation. So set a reminder to contact them if you have not gotten a notification from their insurance company. And when you do receive that confirmation, double check the unit address is correct. Sometimes information falls through the cracks and does not get updated from the last landlord. If the policy has the wrong address or unit number, the insurance company will not cover any issues that arise.
Yeah, we found that happens more often than we like to admit. Got to cross your T's and dot those I's to make sure all the info is correct. If you're looking for a really good insurance company to recommend to your tenants, we like Toggle. They are a division of Farmers Insurance, so you know they are reliable for coverage. Their policies can be very inexpensive. I think as low as $5 a month, depending on the coverage your tenant selects. And their plans are customizable to include cars, pets, or collectibles should your tenant need it. And it's also nice to have a company to recommend to your tenants. Makes you seem like a full-service landlord. We have a PDF we send to our tenants with all the move-in requirements. We'll link it in the show notes for you to check them out. Okay, now let's talk about keys. There should be a small section that discusses how many keys were given and what they are for. It needs to be noted that if the tenant loses a key, there'll be a fee to replace it. If the tenant gets locked out, there's a fee to come in and open up the unit. And if a locksmith is needed, then the cost is on the tenant. Lastly, it should be noted that keys are not to be provided to anyone who is not a resident.
Yeah. So on that one, landlords, never assume that you gave the tenant one key and when they return that one key that that's it. The chance that they've made a copy for their significant other or a babysitter or a family member to come water plants when they're on vacation is highly likely. Now, 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be an issue with that. But that small chance that the key is in the hands of someone who has no qualms about going to the unit and entering after the tenant they know has moved out, you need to change the locks. We're not saying the whole locking system. If you use quick set locking systems, they have a very cheap, very quick way that you can change the keys without changing the door handles. We do this all the time, and I think it's like $6 and takes about, a minute to do? Back in the day, we would have spent over $75 for a mobile locksmith to come out. So we'll link the Quickset smart keys that we use along with a YouTube video to show how easy it is in our show notes.
As a matter of fact, we just purchased electronic key systems for all our units. We haven't installed them yet, but Quickset has a nice setup where you can use a 4-digit coded keypad or a key to enter. The lock is battery operated, and if internet is present, it can be linked to an app on your phone to control codes, like if the unit is vacant and you want to get a repair person or a cleaning crew in there without having to be present. It's also got the Quickset smart key system Stacy mentioned, so you can easily change the key lock when tenants move out. Regular locks are fine in most situations, but tenants really like the convenience of not fumbling with a key, and it seems more upscale. So it's an amenity we're adding to our sixplex to test, and we'll see how well it's received.
Yeah, we initially bought one for our upcoming midterm rental we're launching soon, and then we thought it would look nice to have all the doorknobs match since the entries are so close to each other. Listen, landlords, this episode had way more information than we ever intended, so we're going to stop here for today. Next week, we will finish up the main body of the lease, and then in the third episode, we will discuss addendums and what those are best used for. We have a lot of great stuff still to go on this subject. But before we go, I want to remind you that we have a free newsletter that we send out weekly. It's got a lot of good content specific to DIY landlords just like yourselves. Each week, we do a deep dive, or it's kind of like a mini blog post about a tip. We discuss our favorite products that we really do use in our rental property business. And we always have about 5 landlord specific articles to guide you along on your property investment journey. Oh, and of course, we include the link to our most recent podcast in there too. If you'd like to subscribe to this free newsletter, you can do so at yourlandlordresource.com/subscribe. We'll include the link in the show notes as well. Thanks for tuning in and listening today. See you back here, same time, same place, to finish our conversation about leases and addendums next week. Until then, you've got this, landlords.